Thanks very much, Helen. Our profession is full of people with immense talent, but rare are those who rise to that elite level where they're freely described as a legend. For those who work closely with tonight's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award, you know why he's regarded as a legend. In a career spanning more than 50 years, he was the go-to man when the big story broke, whether it was the Port Arthur tragedy, the death of Princess Diana, the Bali bombings, the Thredbo landslide. From wars to royal tours, from tsunamis to royal shows, he took the readers there. He could always give the story a special touch, that beautifully crafted piece of writing forged from a lifetime as a front row witness of history. I had the privilege of working with tonight's recipient for about 16 of those years when editing the Herald Sun, and can safely say he was an editor's dream. So tonight it is my great honour to announce that John Hamilton is the recipient of this year's Melbourne Press Club Lifetime Achievement Award. So tonight we're celebrating 5 decades of sustained quality, so I've got a few more things to say, so allow me to say them. Hammer, as we respectfully call him, I've got to say, possessed an extraordinary ability to capture the mood and essence of a story. His writing style was always polished, descriptive, yet simple, enabling readers to feel the emotion of the story. Could always smell the smoke of a bushfire and soak up the atmosphere of a special occasion wherever it was in the world. John's told many a great story, but his own is quite remarkable. The story of a boy who came to Australia from the UK when he was 8 and at just 13 became a cadet midshipman in the Royal Australian Naval College at Flinders, but who by 18 had chosen his profession and began his career in journalism at the West Australian. That career has taken him from the goldfields of Kalgoorlie to the scene of some of history's biggest stories, both here and abroad. John was lured to Melbourne by none other than Graham Perkin to join the Age in 1962, and he later joined the Herald and Weekly Times, where he spent 32 years before his retirement last year. John has lived the life any reporter would envy. He's experienced the stories of joy and exaltation, but also moments of tragedy and horror. He's been there for inspirational and historic times, such as being on the White House lawns when Prime Minister Begin of Israel and President Sadat of Egypt signed their historic peace accord. He met Lech Walesa in Warsaw as his solidarity movement led to the collapse of communism. He covered the civil war in East Timor, but John will tell you the biggest story he covered was a disastrous famine in Ethiopia in the 1980s, when more than 1 million people died, and it's a story which moved him like no other. He covered both the marriage and later the funeral of Princess Diana, and I remember sending him to London from probably the furthest place he could have been on the planet, Norfolk Island, but the words he produced made the journey worthwhile. He sat in a sweat-drenched courtroom, watching Schapelle Corby sentenced in Bali, and shivered with the pilgrims at dawn services in Gallipoli. And he's since written 2 best-selling books on Gallipoli. But there have been many happy stories, I'm pleased to say, like being able to describe the elation when Raelene Boyle won gold at the '82 Commonwealth Games and when Cathy Freeman won gold at the Sydney Olympics. But John was just as happy sometimes going out to the Royal Show to write colour about the winner of the Best Chook Award. He's always been unpretentious, trustworthy, perceptive, accurate, and a class act. As we heard earlier, from the beginning, John was always in the top echelon of his profession, having won those Walkleys back in '67 and '68. But the true highlight, I believe, was him being posted to Washington and meeting his wonderful wife, Kay, who I'm delighted is here tonight. Kay was working at the time at the White House on the staff of the Vice President, and I think that was your biggest triumph, John. The great Harry Gordon summed up John brilliantly in a letter which I actually found in his files one day, when he wrote to John on his return to Melbourne from a stint in Brisbane nearly 30 years ago. The memo said, Harry wrote, "You will be called Group Roving Editor. The title may, as you say, be useful in opening doors. I don't see it as such a great asset. I think a far greater one is your name, which has come to represent quality news writing and reporting, and generally it's your name alone which will be used in our papers." And Harry nailed it as usual. So John, congratulations on a magnificent career. On behalf of all your friends and colleagues, we're delighted to celebrate your achievements here tonight. Well done, mate.
Well, Peter's taken a couple of my lines, but that was a terrific speech, and thank you very much. And I'm a bit overwhelmed. You do me very great honour. I feel very humbled by being given this award because it's been given to me by my peers, and I'm accepting it in the company of family and friends, the men and women I know and respect and admire, the working journos in this business we call the media. When Mark Baker called me a few days ago and told me I was going to get this Lifetime Award, I was not only flabbergasted but really quite overwhelmed. Because really, I'm a reporter, nothing more, nothing less, a journeyman journalist with a bag full of words, which is employed to the best of his ability to tell stories. I've been lucky enough to journey to many distant places and tell these stories for a long time. For a reporter who's not bothered much about looking into the rear vision mirror during his career, but rather one who's focused on what he's doing today and looking ahead to what he was going to write tomorrow, to be suddenly confronted by the fact you've been doing it for a lifetime is a very daunting prospect to review. Even more alarming, when I started to total things up a couple of days ago, I actually survived some 31 editors and editors-in-chief. I regard it as an achievement that I always managed to coexist and work with editors, and I've never been fired by any one of them. Some of the best editors are here tonight. Peter, we worked a long time together. Peter was the one who just said to me at Norfolk Island, "Go," and left me to my own devices and how I got from Norfolk Island to London to cover the funeral of Princess Di. You were never in any doubt with Peter where you were. I'm sad to hear that Harry Gordon's in hospital because he's another one on my list of very great editors. And Les Carline, who's here tonight, he and Les were responsible for sending me to Ethiopia for the Great Famine. Now, you're going to be glad to know I'm not going to tell the story of my life tonight, but just to touch on a couple of markers. I wouldn't be here tonight except for something that happened to me exactly 50 years ago in a back bar of a city pub in Perth. I was a young D-grade reporter on the staff of the West Australian at 21, and I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. I got through my cadetship in 2 years, and I was set for life with a job with the West Australian. My ambition was to be a legend like the chief police roundsman who smoked a pipe and drove a black Holden covered with aerials and a radio that was tuned to the police network. And then one day, this burly kind of a bloke breezed into Perth and rang me up. He said he was from a paper called The Age, and he wanted to buy me a beer. So I took my very thin book of newspaper clippings along under my arm to the pub to hopefully impress him, but I didn't need them at all. This bloke talked a very great deal about himself, a little bit about the newspaper, before offering me a C grade. That translated into about $50 a week, but a very great more in value in those days. So I told this bloke I'd think about it, and I went home and I told my dad, who was a cautious man. He urged me to go back and ask what sort of job security came with this offer. So I repeated the question to the burly bloke over the phone the next day. "Security?" said Mr. Graham Perkin. "Security? Jesus, chap, I can only tell you if you stay in Perth, you'll die of old age or boredom, whichever gets you first." Well, of course he was right, so I took the big chance. I drove to Kalgoorlie, loaded my old car onto a freight train, took it off at Port Pirie in South Australia and drove it on to Melbourne. Luckily it was winter and the leaky radiator didn't boil, so I just made it. So 50 years ago, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment above Leo's Spaghetti Bar in Fitzroy Street, St Kilda, and my career in Melbourne journalism had begun. My first job was to be sent out by train to cover nightly meetings of the suburban councils with the instruction from the Chief of Staff to carefully observe the names of passing stations so I could get some idea of the geography of the place. The journey to Ringwood was particularly instructional, and there was always a welcome beer and pie at the end of the council meeting. The next marker is, Peter's touched on it, was when I was sent by the Herald and Weekly Times to Washington. It was a dream assignment to go to Washington as the resident correspondent for the Herald and become accredited to the White House Press Corps. On this particular night, just rather like tonight, I was attending the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner. Everyone was there, from the President and his cabinet to about 1,100 of the nation's movers and shakers, and me. At my table was a very pleasant young lawyer who was working on the White House of the staff, in the White House on the staff of Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. And towards the end of that evening, a beautiful young blonde girl came over to our tables to talk to the lawyer. She was on the Vice President's staff too, and the lawyer introduced her to me. Her name was Charlotte Kay. She was a Southern belle from North Carolina, and she talked like Miss Scarlet from Gone with the Wind. Well, I was gone. I'm still smitten, and here she is tonight, my wife Kay, my American souvenir. And with her is a result of our own ANZUS pact, our son Matt, who's also here to see his old man get this reward. I introduced them not only because of my family, but I couldn't possibly have achieved what I've done without Kay and Matt. They've always been there for me. And so, like many others in our business, our partners are the ones who support us reporters through all those times after the phone call comes in the middle of the night. When great events unfold and the reporter's called away for days, sometimes even weeks, the partner's left home to cope. So thank you to all the partners here tonight for their love and understanding when reporters go abroad. Now, I'm going to wind up very quickly on a little serious note. As well as getting my wife, I learnt many things in America. I learnt about how Americans value seriously something we take very casually in Australia. It's called freedom. I learned about the American Declaration of Independence and its immortal words that I treasure, that we're all entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I learnt too about the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the phrase from the First Amendment that states categorically and unambiguously that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or infringing on the freedom of the press. I wish I could quote to you something similar from the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia, even an amendment. Alas, I cannot. So let this old reporter end on a note of warning. Beware of the war against the freedom of speech and freedom of the press that's now intensifying around the world. Beware of people here telling you what is appropriate or inappropriate and imposing their standards on you on how you should behave and what you should do and what you should or should not write. Beware of governments with Big Brother titles. When I was sent to totalitarian Ethiopia 20 years ago to cover the Great Famine, I was first arrested because I was a journalist. Then I had to register with a Ministry for Information and Public Enlightenment to get a license to travel outside the capital. Today in Australia, we already have the quaintly named Ministry for Broadband, Communications and the Digital Economy, whatever that means. So sound the alarm bells when anything like the independent inquiry into the media and media regulation raises its ugly head here, and start asking the questions, independent of what? Set up by the government, paid for by the government, and reporting back to the government on media regulation. So shout and hollow when something called a News Media Council is proposed. It simply means government control. And just remember that one word, freedom, and go out and fight for it. Thank you.